Did you know James Cameron's 1984 masterpiece? The Terminator was inspired by a literal fever nightmare of a chrome skeleton dragging itself out of a fire? Welcome to Cambodia, where we dive deep into the legendary retro movies that raised us. If you love these nostalgic wild facts, make sure to hit subscribe and ring that bell. Now, let's get into it. Detail 25. The film was shot almost entirely without a studio backing at first. Before Orion Pictures agreed to distribute the Terminator, the production was essentially an independent guerrilla operation. Director James Cameron and producer Gail Ann Hurd had to scrape together funding from Heimdall Film Corporation, a small outfit known for taking risks on directors with vision but zero track record. The initial budget was only $6.4 million, laughable for a sci-fi action film, even in 1984. Cameron maxed out credit cards, sold the rights to the script for $1 to Hurd on condition she would produce it, and the crew often worked without permits on the streets of Los Angeles. The future war scenes in the opening were filmed in a desolate area behind a Los Angeles factory, dressed with burned-out vehicles and rubble. The legendary tanker truck explosion in the climax was a one-take-only shot because they couldn't afford a second truck. The entire film has the gritty, duct tape, and hope feel of a project that shouldn't have worked. Yet, somehow, every constraint fed the relentless tension.
Cyborgs don't feel pain. I do. Don't do that again.
Just let me go.
Detail 24. Schwarzenegger was almost cast as Kyle Reese. The original casting concept for Arnold Schwarzenegger was wildly different. James Cameron initially envisioned him as the heroic Kyle Reese, while the Terminator was to be played by someone leaner and more anonymous. Perhaps Lance Henriksen, who later appeared as Detective Vukovich. Cameron even sketched concepts with Henriksen as a skeletal, infiltration-style killer who could blend into a crowd easily. When Arnold met with Cameron to discuss the film, he wasn't interested in the hero role. He was obsessed with the villain. He arrived at the meeting having memorized lines for the Terminator and pitched his vision of the character as a machine that moves with predatory stillness. Cameron was so impressed by Arnold's intensity that he flipped the casting, making Henriksen a detective and rewriting the Terminator's physicality around Arnold's bodybuilder frame. The rest is muscle-bound history.
I'll be back.
Detail 23. The famous, "I'll be back" line was merely cut from the script. The line that would become Arnold Schwarzenegger's most iconic catchphrase almost didn't make it. In the original script, the Terminator says, "I'll come back," after the police desk sergeant refuses him entry. Arnold felt the phrasing was too robotic and suggested the more colloquial, "I'll be back," which he'd heard in everyday American conversation. Cameron agreed to the change, but a dispute with the sound mixer nearly killed it. The line was recorded low in the initial audio pass, and some producers felt it was an awkward beat. It was only after test audiences responded with delighted applause that the line was left intact. Schwarzenegger has since delivered the line in nearly every film he's made, but it was born from a small improvisation in a low-budget sci-fi shoot that no one expected to become legendary. Detail 22. The Terminator's red eye was a practical light bulb under a contact lens. The glowing red eye of the T-800's endoskeleton in the final chase wasn't a digital effect. There was no CGI in 1984. The effect was achieved by embedding a tiny incandescent light bulb inside a custom-fitted contact lens worn by a stunt performer. The bulb was connected to a battery pack hidden in the actor's mouth, and the heat from the filament would become extremely uncomfortable after a few seconds, limiting takes to brief bursts. For the full endoskeleton shots created by stop-motion master Stan Winston, the eye was a small LED illuminated from within the puppet. The iconic red glow that signaled the machine's relentless pursuit was literally a burning pain in someone's eye, a perfect metaphor for the film's production ethos. Detail 21. The endoskeleton stop-motion was photographed on a kitchen table. Stan Winston's team built a detailed, articulated endoskeleton puppet for the stop-motion sequences of the Terminator, limping after Sarah Connor in the factory. But the production couldn't afford a full motion control rig or a dedicated animation stage. So visual effects artist Doug Beswick photographed the model on a makeshift stand setup in a corner of Winston's workshop, essentially a reinforced kitchen table. The camera was a rented Mitchell that had to be carefully locked down. The background plates of the factory were rear projected behind the stop-motion animation. The sequence took weeks of painstaking frame-by-frame work under hot lights, often resulting in only seconds of screen time per day. The choppy, skeletal gait that resulted had a nightmarish quality that smoother computer animation might have lacked. Detail 20. James Cameron stole his own camera gear for the future war scenes. The grim, blue-lit future war sequences that open the film were shot on the fly, using equipment that Cameron essentially borrowed without permission from a rental house he'd previously worked at. He and a small crew snuck into an abandoned industrial area, set up smudge pots and flares, and filmed the HK tanks and laser fire in a single night. The actors playing human resistance fighters were friends and film students wearing scavenged bits of military surplus. The iconic shot of the tank-like hunter-killer crushing human skulls was done with miniature models built from model kit parts and crushed on a table. The entire future war aesthetic, the grime, the shadow, the sense of perpetual night was born from necessity and a complete absence of official authorization.
I'm a friend of Sarah Connor.
Detail 19. The Terminator's leather jacket was a last-minute store purchase. The black leather jacket that became a cultural icon wasn't custom-made by a costume designer. It was bought off the rack at a Melrose Avenue boutique in Los Angeles the day before filming the scenes of the Terminator acquiring his clothes. The jacket, a shot perfecto style, was chosen because it emphasized Arnold's massive shoulders while giving him a sleek, aggressive silhouette. It was paired with black jeans and engineer boots, all standard biker gear, but worn by a machine, it became something sinister. The jacket had to be let out slightly in the back to accommodate Arnold's lats, and multiple copies were eventually made, but the first one worn on camera cost $78. It now resides in a private collection, having survived explosions, motorcycle wrecks, and one very angry police station. Detail 18. The police station massacre was shot in an actual former police station. The sequence where the Terminator obliterates the entire police precinct was filmed in a real Los Angeles police station that had been decommissioned. The production filled the rooms with squibs and breakaway furniture, and many of the extras were off-duty officers who'd volunteered to get killed by a futuristic cyborg. The armory shelves were stocked with deactivated firearms, and the shattered glass was made of sugar-based breakaway panes. Arnold Schwarzenegger learned to handle the modified AMT hardballer long-slide pistol with an extended barrel that became the Terminator's signature weapon. The pistol was so heavy that he had to train to hold it steady. The rampage sequence required 22 separate squib detonations, each timed to coincide with camera moves, and the resulting chaos remains one of the most brutal single-location action scenes of the 1980s. Detail 17. Sarah Connor's transformation was based on Cameron's own fear of weakness. James Cameron has said in interviews that the character of Sarah Connor, from vulnerable waitress to hardened survivor, was a personal metaphor for his own journey from a truck-driving film school reject to a filmmaker who could command a set. The moment where Sarah starts doing pull-ups on an overturned bed frame was directly inspired by Cameron's habit of exercising obsessively while writing, channeling anxiety into physical strength. Linda Hamilton trained rigorously for the role, not just in firearms but in survival skills, and she pushed for Sarah to be genuinely terrified rather than a plucky action heroine right away. Her scream during the tech noir shootout wasn't a performance. She had temporarily injured her ankle and was channeling real pain. That fusion of authentic fear and determination gave the character a lived-in quality, rare in 1980s action films. Detail 16. The Tech Noir nightclub was a real club, dressed for dystopia. The Tech Noir club where Sarah hides and the Terminator first hunts her was an actual Los Angeles nightclub called the Palomino, primarily a country western bar. The production transformed it into a neon-drenched futuristic dance club for a single week of overnight shoots. The pulsing synth soundtrack during that scene was performed live on set by the band Triangles, and the background dancers were club regulars who showed up to be in a movie. The script called for the club to feel like a cross between a bunker and a fashion runway, and the production designer used reflective surfaces, fog machines, and colored gels to create the sense of a world already half consumed by technology. The blue and pink lighting became a signature of Cameron's early aesthetic, echoing the cold future war palette and the warm flesh tones of the present. Detail 15. The film's sound design was created on a shoestring with household objects. The Terminator's iconic metallic footsteps, the screech of the hunter-killer, even the squishing sound of the T-800 crushing a skull, all were folied using everyday items. The endoskeleton clanking was produced by dragging a metal chain across a concrete floor in a garage. The high-pitched whine of the HK's laser cannon came from a modified electric drill. The sound of the Terminator punching through a car window was achieved by smashing a watermelon wrapped in a leather jacket. The most disturbing effect, the squish of the dead Sarah Connor's dog in the alternate future, was a soaped towel being stepped on. The entire sound library was assembled by a tiny post-production team working on borrowed equipment, and their ingenuity gave the film an oral texture that feels industrial and grinding, perfectly matching the vision of a world built by machines. Detail 14. The Terminator's sunglasses were a Gargoyles model, chosen for their soulless look. The wraparound sunglasses worn by the Terminator throughout the film were a specific model, Gargoyles, produced by the sunglasses company Carrera. They were chosen by the costume department after testing dozens of options because their curved, reflective surface made Arnold's eyes completely invisible, robbing his face of any human warmth. In the police station scene, the sunglasses hide the fact that the Terminator's organic eye has been damaged, but they also serve a thematic purpose. They turn him into a mirror reflecting the terror of his victims. Gargoyles became so associated with the film that sales spiked dramatically in 1984, and Arnold wore them in real life for years afterward. Detail 13. The original script had the Terminator eating a candy bar for energy. In James Cameron's earliest drafts, the Terminator was a more literal infiltration unit that needed to consume food for energy. He was supposed to eat a candy bar in one scene to replenish his biological power cells. Cameron later realized that a machine running on a small nuclear power cell, as established in later dialogue, would have no need to eat, and the idea was dropped. However, the concept of the Terminator understanding human sustenance remained in subtle ways. In the final film, he barely interacts with food, and his physical stillness contrasts with the constant eating and drinking of the human characters. This small abandoned detail shows how Cameron refined the mythology, stripping away anything that made the Terminator less alien.
Hi there. I fooled you. You're talking to a machine, but don't be shy.
Detail 12. The film was shot in such a rush that the crew often filmed without a permitted location. The low-budget, 44-day shooting schedule meant that many scenes were captured with minimal permissions. The iconic opening sequence of the Terminator arriving naked in a Los Angeles alley was filmed in a real downtown alley that hadn't been closed to traffic. The crew would quickly set up, roll camera, and hope no trucks entered the frame. The scene where Kyle Reese steals a pair of pants from a homeless man was shot near Skid Row without any official location agreement. The homeless extra was a genuine resident of the area, who was paid in cash and a hot meal. The police chase after the phone book scene used real intersections that were only partially cordoned off by production assistants waving flashlights. This run-and-gun methodology gave the film a documentary immediacy that a more controlled production would have lacked. Detail 11. Michael Biehn's accent as Kyle Reese was created through exhaustion. Michael Biehn's haunting, hollow-eyed performance as Kyle Reese was partly a product of sheer fatigue. He had been working on another film right before The Terminator began and arrived on set with almost no break. Cameron instructed him to speak in a low, raspy, whispery tone to suggest a man who has spent his entire life fighting machines, rarely sleeping, and living in constant fear. Biehn's accent, a strange, flattened American dialect with occasional British inflections, was developed during late-night rehearsals when he was too exhausted to maintain a standard delivery. Cameron loved the effect and told him to keep it. The result is a performance that feels genuinely displaced, a man from a nightmare future who can't quite speak the language of the present.
Sarah, this is Dr. Silverman. Hi, Sarah. I want you to tell him everything that Reese told you.
Detail 10. The film's score was composed on a synthesizer borrowed from a friend. Brad Feidel's now legendary score, built around that stark, mechanical main theme, was composed almost entirely on a Prophet 10 synthesizer that Feidel had borrowed from a friend. He had no orchestra budget, no assistant, and only a few weeks to complete the soundtrack. Feidel programmed the metallic percussive sounds by sampling hammers, striking anvils and car parts, then processing them through the synth. The 5-note, da-da-da motif was meant to emulate the relentless, cyclic rhythm of a beating heart, or a marching machine. The score's minimalism and coldness were initially criticized by the studio, but it became inseparable from the film's identity, as iconic as any orchestral blockbuster theme. Detail 9. The Terminator's haircut was a mistake that became canon. In the scene where the Terminator shoots his reflection to remove a damaged organic eye, we get a clear look at his hairstyle, a severe, chopped, almost punk-inspired cut. This wasn't a deliberate style choice. It was the result of a rushed haircut session in Arnold's trailer, where a stylist used clippers unevenly. Cameron saw it and decided it made the Terminator look more unsettling, as if a machine had cut its own hair without understanding human aesthetics. In sequels, the haircut became more symmetrical, but the original's lopsided intensity has been imitated in countless homages. Detail 8. The film's sci-fi elements were heavily inspired by a single Twilight Zone episode. James Cameron has cited the 1963 The Outer Limits episode, Soldier, written by Harlan Ellison, and the Twilight Zone episode, The Brain Center at Whipple's, has inspirations, but the most direct influence on the time loop, Paradox, came from a lesser-known Twilight Zone segment called Spur of the Moment. In that episode, a young woman is pursued by a mysterious figure on horseback who turns out to be her older self, trying to prevent her from making a tragic choice. The circular timeline, the idea of a future agent returning to alter the past, and the identity reveal twist all fed into Cameron's script. Ellison later filed a copyright claim over similarities to his work, and a settlement added an acknowledgement to subsequent prints. The nested temporal paradox Kyle Reese, fathering the man who would send him back, remains one of the most elegant loops in sci-fi cinema.
So...
Detail 7. The film's original ending showed a peaceful future with Sarah Connor as a grandmother. An early draft of the script ended with a flash-forward to a peaceful future, where an elderly Sarah Connor recounts the story of the Terminator to her grandchildren, implying that Skynet was never built. The sky is blue, children play, and the machines are a distant memory. This ending was deemed too sentimental, and was scrapped in favor of the ambiguous gas station finale, with Sarah driving into a storm. The cut ending still photographs exist, and they reveal a completely different emotional register, one of hope rather than dread. Cameron later said he preferred the darker, uncertain ending because it left the audience with a question. Is the nightmare truly over, or has she merely postponed it? Detail 6. The film's title was almost The Cyborg, or The Night of the Terminator. The original working title for the script was simply The Cyborg. Orion's marketing department pushed for something more dramatic, suggesting The Night of the Terminator, Future Kill, and even Chrome Death. Cameron insisted on the blunt, Germanic simplicity of the Terminator, arguing that the word itself, clinical, technical, and menacing, was enough to convey the concept. The studio eventually agreed, though they fretted that audiences might not understand the word. The title card in the opening credits appears in a stark red font against a black background, a design that hasn't changed in decades of sequels.
Defense. So, which'll it be?
All.
Detail 5. Arnold Schwarzenegger underwent weapons training for only 1 week. To prepare for the role, Schwarzenegger trained with actual LAPD SWAT officers for 1 week, focusing on firearm handling, reloading, and movement. He was taught to strip and reassemble the AMT hardballer longslide and the SPAS 12 shotgun used in the police station shootout. His distinctive, robotic shooting posture, one hand extended, head cocked slightly, was developed during this training, inspired by the way a machine would lock onto a target without recoil anticipation. The officers were reportedly stunned by how quickly he absorbed the physical discipline. They later joked that they'd created a monster. That 1 week of training defined the iconic silhouette of the Terminator in every subsequent installment.
Get out.
Detail 4. The film was rejected by every major studio before Orion took a chance. Before Orion and Himdale stepped in, James Cameron and Gail Anherd pitched the Terminator to Universal, Paramount, and Warner Brothers. Universal wanted a more comedic tone, Paramount balked at the dark subject matter, and Warner Brothers didn't think the concept could sustain a feature. A junior executive at Orion saw a rough storyboard of the exoskeleton rising from flames and greenlit a small distribution deal. The film earned over $78 million worldwide, making it one of the most profitable independent films of the decade, and spawned a franchise worth billions. The rejection letters are now framed in Cameron's office. Detail 3. The stop-motion endoskeleton was sculpted using real human anatomy for reference. Stan Winston's team used medical diagrams and a real human skeleton borrowed from a university to ensure the endoskeleton's proportions were plausible. Only then did they exaggerate the shoulders and jaw to make it more menacing. The chrome-plated teeth were individually cast from dental molds, and the pistons in the fingers were actual miniature hydraulic cylinders salvaged from model airplanes. Each of the 5 endoskeleton puppets built for the film cost around $20,000, a huge chunk of the tiny effects budget. The level of craftsmanship meant that, even in stop motion, the Terminator felt unsettlingly real. In 2008, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences voted the Terminator endoskeleton one of the most influential movie props of all time.
Come with me if you want to live.
Detail 2, the film's iconic phrase, "Come with me if you want to live," was improvised in a panic. Michael Biehn ad-libbed the line to Linda Hamilton during the Tech Noir shootout because he blanked on the scripted line, which was originally the more formal, "You must come with me. Your life is in danger." In the chaos of the scene, multiple takes, loud music, smoke, Biehn's mind went blank, and he blurted out the simpler, more urgent phrasing. Cameron kept it because it perfectly encapsulated Reese's direct, soldierly demeanor and became one of the most quoted lines in the franchise. Detail 1. The entire film was shot in chronological order, a rarity in Hollywood. Because the script relies so heavily on the gradual revelation of the time travel premise, James Cameron insisted on filming almost every scene in sequence. This is almost unheard of in film production, where logistics usually dictate that all scenes in a given location be filmed together, regardless of where they fall in the story. Shooting chronologically allowed Linda Hamilton to develop Sarah's transformation naturally, day by day, from waitress to warrior. It also meant that Arnold's Terminator became progressively more damaged in real time, with the makeup and prosthetics team carefully tracking each scar and wound. The process was expensive and occasionally inefficient, but it preserved a raw performance continuity that gives the film its relentless forward momentum. So there you have it. 25 strange, sun-baked, and oil-stained secrets from a $6.4 million miracle that redefined science fiction. The next time you watch a naked Austrian giant demand clothes from a gang of punks, remember the borrowed camera gear, the kitchen table stop motion, and the gargoyles that hit a soulless stare. If these details made you want to re-watch the classic, hit that like button. It genuinely helps Kumbalgia, and it tells us you're ready for more deep dives into the films that shaped our nightmares. Subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment naming the next sci-fi classic you want us to crack open. We read every single one.